one I wanted to show you here. So Donald Trump has a history of not only demeaning and denigrating and downplaying and ostracizing and I don't know, and any other word you could possibly think of that puts the U.S. military service members in a negative light, both past and present. We remember his remarks about POWs. We remember his remarks about suckers and losers and not wanting to go to the cemetery to pay respects to the World War I veterans, I believe, if I'm getting that correctly now. We've talked about his demeaning of Senator John McCain, who was shot down over Vietnam and spent time in the Hanoi Hilton, was tortured. Not only that, but Donald Trump was mocking the fact that he couldn't use of his arm in full function because of his torture, because of his plane crash, because of his shooting down, because of his heroism and sacrifices and dedication to this country. All this by a man that was given the ability to dodge drafts because of some, what was it, bone spurs? Is that what it was? Because of some bullshit bone spurs. And he has the gall, the balls to come out here and talk about people that actually flew in combat missions, actually flew over enemy territory, were shot down and spent time in POW camps, right? We remember this right here, where Donald Trump is heard downplaying the traumatic brain injuries of service members that were involved in a strike on a base in Iraq by Iran. But I want you to listen carefully in this, because not only does his facial expressions, everything about what he's saying, just completely spit on the heroism and the dedication that the U.S. service members of our military show day in and day out. But also his stupid line that he now pulled out again, talking about how Iran called ahead of time to let us know when and where these bombs were going to be dropped. So I guess we had the ability to defend against them, so they did nothing. I don't know. If you can make sense of it, again, let me know. But this is Donald Trump in 2020. This was, so I can get this date right, this was posted 8 months ago, but this was from 2020, if I'm getting that correctly. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the chat. Talking about answering a question about the traumatic brain injuries that these service members faced and had because of this attack, and then listen to what he goes on to say after, and then we can have that go one-to-one to what he's saying and doing now, right? So let's listen up.
Do you think Israel should retaliate to these missile attacks from Iran? But also, do you believe that you should have been tougher on Iran after they had launched ballistic missiles in 2020 on U.S. forces in Iraq, leaving more than 100 U.S. soldiers injured?
So, first of all, injured. What does injured mean? Injured means you mean...
Right, so right off the bat, leaving over 100 service members injured, the woman says. His first thought is to downplay in the definition of the word injured, right? He's trying to downplay the severity of their injuries that they sustained because of his incompetence, right? So let's listen to that.
U.S. soldiers injured.
So, first of all, injured. What is
injured? First of all, injured. His dismissive, condescending tone, all right? The dismissive nature of the question that is being asked on behalf of these U.S. military service members who were injured and did sustain head injuries in this attack.
Does injured mean? Injured means you mean because they had a headache, because the bombs never hit the fort?
Because they had a headache. Okay, let's see here. Just so we can get the total facts, should I type in 100 U.S. injured Iraq? I should bring it up. Here we go. Share this tab instead. 109 U.S. troops suffered brain injuries in Iran strike, Pentagon says. The Defense Department says 45 more U.S. service members have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries after Iran's attack on the Ain el-Assad air base in Iraq last month, raising the total number of troops injured in the ballistic missile strike to 109. Of those who were injured, 76 have returned to duty. A Pentagon statement about the injuries did not include details about the service members, such as their rank, age, or military unit. Monday's update is at least the fifth time the U.S. has revised the number of personal injuries attack in the Iranian attack. President Trump initially reported no U.S. troops were injured. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. Trump said shortly after the strike, he added, "We suffered no casualties," Clearly, he doesn't know the definition of a casualty. But the Pentagon said later that 11 people had suffered traumatic brain injuries, and on January 4th, the number jumped to 34. Nearly a week later, the Pentagon said 50 personnel were injured, only to revise that figure days later to 64, now having that all the way up to 109, right? 27 were transported from Iraq to U.S. Medical facilities in Germany. 21 were transported from Germany to the U.S. for treatment. 7 are currently en route from Iraq to Germany. 5 are still being evaluated. The Iranian attack targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases housing U.S. personnel, including the Ain al-Assad base. Iran's actions were in retaliation for the U.S. drone strike that killed one of its most prominent military commanders, Qasem Soleimani. So this was, again, in retaliation for something that Donald Trump prompted. Right? Something that Donald Trump is responsible for giving the okay to do. Now, this was in response. And then in response to that, Donald Trump downplays the injury sustained. So let's hear this one more time.
Soldiers injured.
So, first of all, injured. What does injured mean? Injured means you mean because they had a headache, because the bombs never hit the fort. So just so you understand, there was nobody ever tougher in Iraq. They had no money.
On Iraq? Pretty sure that the old man meant to say Iran, right? Because it makes absolutely no sense to say he was tough on Iraq in this situation. We have U.S. military bases in Iraq. What the fuck are you trying to be tough on Iraq for? So what he meant to say was Iran. He'll go on to talk about Hamas, the rest of the Iranian proxies. But again, no idea what he's talking about. And this was 5 years ago, people. I believe this is 2020. Did anybody get me in the chat? This is 2020, correct? Just to be 100% factual on this one. Because this was posted at a later date. So it's hard for me to get the exact date. But I believe it's sometime in 2020.
Money with me. They would have made any deal with me. I would have had a deal made within, literally, I would have had a deal made within.
No. Let me know in the chat. Now I'm confusing myself.
1 week after the election. They were dying to make a deal. And when you say not tough, they had no money. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for Hezbollah. And when we hit them, they hit us, and they called us, and they said, we're going to shoot at your fort.
They called us and said that we are going to shoot at your fort. And as in response to that, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States of America, Donald Trump said, okay. Apparently, he okayed that in hopes that we would, just shoot them down, or in hopes that all of these would strike short of the base? I mean, let's think about that for a second, guys. Let's think about that. Let's hear that one more time and think about that for a second.
They hit us, and they called us, and they said, we're going to shoot at your fort, but we're not going to hit it.
And in response to that, we can only assume, right, because the strikes were actually carried out, because they actually took place, because they actually struck the base that they were talking about, because servicemen and women were actually injured in this attack, we can only assume that Iran supposedly calling Donald Trump and saying, we're going to shoot at your faces, we are going to strike this specific base, supposedly, and we can only be led to believe that Donald Trump said, okay, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States of America. There's nothing else to be drawn from that other than he said yes.
And if you were a truthful reporter, which you're not, you would tell the following: none of those very accurate missiles hit our fort. They all hit outside, and there was nobody hurt other than the sound. It was loud, and some people said that hurt, and I accept that.
The sound was loud. That's the olive branch he's willing to extend to the 109 people, many of which experienced traumatic brain injury, had to be shipped from Iraq to Germany, some from Germany to the U.S. for further treatment. 7 that are still being evaluated, and he's willing to only give them that the sound was loud. Mr. Bone Spurs here, Mr. Dodge in the draft, Mr. John McCain is a weakling. I don't respect him. I only respect people that weren't captured, the suckers and losers. Why do these people give their lives? I'm not going there because it's raining. Fuck these troops. This guy, the guy that wouldn't receive the bodies of servicemen and women that have come back from overseas, that died in duty, either in combat or in training or otherwise, the man that sent other people to receive these bodies. This motherfucker has something to say about the sound and how the sound is loud, and that's about how far he's willing to go. Give me a break. And if this doesn't go to show how incompetent he was at dealing with Iran the first time, it should very well drive home the fact that there's no chance he's going to be more competent or effective being much older, much weaker, less wise, less competent, having the brain melting from his orange ears. There's no way that he's going to handle this situation that we now find ourselves in a better way than he did before. It's not going to happen.